Do you agree that any Democrat politician, or let me be clear, any Republican politician that had knowledge of the fraud and was complicit should be prosecuted?
I'm not sure what they're being prosecuted for, but also in my testimony, I described also outside of Minnesota the manifold ways that this administration is enabling fraud.
Look, I understand.
Oh,
and the reason, hold on.
The standard is that you want
Sir,
to prosecute
I'm going to
people.
ask a question, and then you can answer it.
Yes, sir.
Your organization describes itself as a pro-democracy organization. I'm going to
Correct.
try to find out if you actually are pro-democracy or if you're simply pro-Democrat and are a partisan. We've seen the Democrats who want to change the topic. So I get you want to testify how much you hate Donald Trump. But I'm quite certain Donald Trump was not running a fraudulent daycare center or a fraudulent autism center in Minnesota. So let's start with you. How broad was the fraud that was perpetrated in Minnesota?
We are still getting a handle on it, but it's all of the, not all of, but a huge segment of the child care programs, autism services, sober homes, emergency transportation, of 14 areas of Medicaid fraud, SNAP benefits. We are still, I would say, getting whistleblower reports, uncovering new vectors of fraud. We just discovered the adult day services and the assisted living. Those haven't been counted in the total so far. So I believe it's much broader than we currently know, and we will continue to expose it.
Is there any chance the elected Democrats in charge of the state were unaware of the fraud?
No. There have been credible whistleblower allegations, press reports, and Office of Legislative Auditor reports for many years.
Mr. Hoke, I want to thank you for your citizen journalism and your hard work pressing for accountability here. I will say I watched the video that you did with rapt attention. It was profoundly effective. It was also, by the way, an indictment of all of the so-called journalists on the national level, because none of them could be bothered to actually go and investigate. I want to ask you the same questions I asked Representative Robbins. Number one, how broad do you believe the evidence shows the fraud in Minnesota was?
It's easily in excess of $30 billion when you take everything into account. You've got all of these NGOs, you've got nonprofits, you've got county money, you've got city money, you've got CCAP money, you've got another thing called Great Start. So there are all these piles of money that factor into the fraud. I don't know that anybody can ever determine an exact number, but I kept telling the U.S. attorney when he came out, I said, you got to get your number up, you got to get your number up, and he did. He kept ratcheting up the number, and I kept saying, you got to be at least at $30 billion. So going back to whether Governor Walz knew about it, Governor Walz admitted knowing about the fraud early in his first term, which would say 2020. Well, Minnesota Statute 3.971, Subdivision 9, clearly says that if you are made aware of fraud in a state agency, you are obligated to immediately report that fraud to the Office of the Legislative Auditor. Immediately. The Legislative Auditor is then the body that determines which law enforcement agency to bring into the investigation. Governor Walz did not contact the Office of the Legislative Auditor. He said he contacted the FBI about what? That's not what the law says.
How many organizations receiving taxpayer funds did you visit in total?
How many?
How many organizations or ostensible organizations?
Companies? Yeah. 200.
Of the child care centers you visited, how many kids did you see?
The only place that I saw children was at KinderCare and New Horizons, which are, in my opinion, legitimate. They're large scale. They have play areas. And they also receive CCAP money, but they're the only places that I saw where there were children present, ever, at any of them.
How about the autism centers? Did you see children? Did you see patients there?
Never. So that's not to say there weren't any, but there were never there. There were never any there. When I was there, never any footprints in the snow, same thing.
Mr. Weissman, you're co-president of Public Citizen, which describes itself as a consumer advocate and a pro-democracy organization. Would you agree that the fraud in Minnesota was staggering and shocking?
I agree that there is fraud in Minnesota. I don't believe these estimates are grounded in any evidence that I've seen. The $9 billion figure was based on a claim just that, well, I think that half of them must be fraudulent. I just heard a comment just saying, boost the number up. But to be clear, and with respect, you missed my testimony. No question there's fraud in Minnesota, and absolutely I share your righteous anger about whatever degree of fraud there was there.
Do you agree that any Democrat politician, or let me be clear, any Republican politician that had knowledge of the fraud and was complicit should be prosecuted?
I'm not sure what they're being prosecuted for, but also in my testimony, I described also outside of Minnesota the manifold ways that this administration is enabling fraud.
Look, I understand.
Oh,
The reason, hold on.
The standard is that you want
Sir,
to prosecute
I'm going to
people.
ask a question, and then you can answer it.
Yes, sir.
Your organization describes itself as a pro-democracy organization. I'm going to
Correct.
try to find out if you actually are pro-democracy or if you're simply pro-Democrat and are a partisan. We've seen the Democrats who want to change the topic. So I get you want to testify how much you hate Donald Trump. But I'm quite certain Donald Trump was not running a fraudulent daycare center or a fraudulent autism center in Minnesota. So all of the talking points about how you dislike Trump, set them aside. We will see the Democrats on this committee go down those talking points. Do you believe elected politicians in Minnesota who were aware of this fraud and were complicit in it should be prosecuted? Should there be accountability?
There absolutely should be accountability. It is not normal to prosecute government officials for not prosecuting fraud. That is not a standard I'm aware of that you've advocated or that anyone else has advocated in the Senate.
So do you think it's perfectly okay?
I did not say
if
it's
let's
okay.
if let's say Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison knew about the fraud, benefited from the fraud in terms of bundling votes, benefited from the frauds in terms of collecting campaign finance violations, and deliberately looked the other way. You think that's not criminal conduct?
In that hypothetical, it is not okay. 100% not okay. But also, if you'll permit me, that hypothetical is in fact happening throughout.
Okay, yes, I get it. You dislike Trump. I understand.
It's nothing about whether I dislike Trump, Mr. Cruz. It is whether I have a standard of accountability.
So let me ask, sir, please do not interrupt me. Please do not.
I'm being clear. I am.
Please do not interrupt me. Please do not interrupt me.
Sir.
You may answer questions after I ask them. You've heard the evidence and testimony about daycare centers with no children, with no toys, with no facilities, with windows that are blacked out. Do you believe it is possible that the officials sending millions of dollars to those fake daycare centers and fake autism centers didn't know what was going on?
Well, what I heard was claims about that, and I too have watched the video. We're both parents. I'm glad that the child care centers don't open their door for someone who's knocking there. I don't view that as evidence that the child care centers are fake child care centers, although I'm sure there are some. My understanding is that state investigators have gone to do their duty at those exact same child centers and have found that most of them actually are operating correctly.
Well, I will say it is disappointing that you had a chance leading a nonprofit that is supposedly pro-democracy to take a principled stand. Instead, you decided to defend the Somali fraudsters because it benefits elected Democrats. That's disappointing. But you know what? I'm going to give you something you're going to like, an opportunity to say all the ways you dislike President Trump, because I'm going to recognize the ranking member who will surely ask you why Trump is terrible and do everything you and he can do to change the topic from the actual topic of this hearing. Ranking member Whitehouse.
Before we get to that, I don't want to leave what seemed to be a pretty flagrant mischaracterization of your testimony without an opportunity for you to address that mischaracterization, if you would care to begin with that.
I appreciate that. Just briefly, I was disagreeing with the premise of the question that we have been displayed this evidence showing criminal wrongdoing. Obviously, where there is criminal wrongdoing, and I testified to this, I support aggressive investigation and prosecution. To the degree there is wrongdoing in Minnesota, it should be aggressively investigated and prosecuted. I'm not sure that the claim that all the evidence we've been presented today is in fact evidence of that, but I don't deny it for a moment that it is occurring in Minnesota.
Let me ask you another question. In a democracy, is there a significant difference between private individuals engaging in fraud and self-dealing against the government and government officials, public officials, engaging in fraud and self-dealing against the government?
They are both wrong, concerning, problematic, but the betrayal by public officials is morally and from a political point of view more consequential.
Yeah, it's a worse element, isn't it? So the chairman has pointed out that President Trump did not run a fake daycare. What are the 4 or 5 things that Trump did that used his position to enrich himself and his family at the expense of the American taxpayer?
Well, I've detailed this in my testimony. Most shockingly is the report from the Wall Street Journal this past weekend about a Trump-connected business partnering with UAE in a deal that directly put $187 million in the pockets of the president and his family. He additionally has joint ventures or elaborate licensing deals with Saudi companies, companies from Qatar. He is engaged in this elaborate cryptocurrency arrangements that have made him at least $2 billion by independent estimates, and maybe even more, just in the course of the last year.
And let's look for a moment at the pardon process, which used to be operated under the supervision and scrutiny of the Department of Justice and now appears to have moved to the lounge at Mar-a-Lago. It seems that there is a pay-to-play arrangement by which people can acquire pardons. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, we've seen the president use his pardon power aggressively, and I don't begrudge him for doing that whatsoever. But what is shocking is that, leaving aside the January 6 pardons, they've been so heavily focused on those who've committed white-collar crimes, and particularly fraud.
Fraud crimes.
People who have committed those crimes, shown no remorse for those crimes, owed restitution for those crimes, or excused for restitution for those crimes, and who appear to be getting off because of their connection to the president, because they've hired high-priced lobbyists to get them there, or have made, or they or their families have made contributions to the president's political committees or those that benefit him directly.
Do you think that fits into what the public generally understands to be pay to play?
Yes, sir.
So we are now in a political environment and government in which the cops basically have been defunded or fired. The inspectors general have the job of rooting out fraud and corruption. What's the Trump administration doing if it's concerned about fraud and corruption with the Inspector General Corps of the United States?
Well, I don't believe it is concerned about fraud and corruption. I believe it's effectively advancing fraud and corruption, including by eviscerating the IG community. As I mentioned, 2/3 of the IGs presidentially appointed have been fired by this president, and the IG staffs are massively diminished in just 1 year. These are the agencies that are in charge of doing exactly what we're talking about in Minnesota. It's their job to find that kind of fraud. If there was a genuine commitment to being worried about that fraud, not for partisan reasons, but because we actually cared about fraud, we'd be, as Senator Grassley said, supporting and strengthening that IG community, not cutting it off at the knees.
My time is up, and I've paid the members the courtesy of staying within my time.